Today's episode of Real Talk is brought to you by the Division of the Arts at UW-Madison. The Division of the Arts at UW-Madison believes the arts are for everyone, everywhere. Their online arts hub is a great resource for finding arts events and opportunities. Discover how to be part of the campus arts community by visiting go.wisc.edu/arts events. That's go.wisc.edu/arts events. Well, thank you for joining us. This is our last panel for the day, 25 panels over 5 days. It's been a beautiful journey. I hope you've enjoyed the content. Today, we're going to end our panel with our Real Talk panel, and we have some dynamic, outstanding, strong women who are doing all wonderful things in their own right, and I'm just humbled to be the moderator for this panel, because we have so many powerful women who are just wonderful things for our state and our community. So why don't you want to bring in Francesca Hong? How are you?
I'm doing okay, Henry. How are you feeling today?
I'm good. I'm feeling good. I want to bring in Sandy Morales. How are you, Sandy?
Doing well. Happy that it's Friday and looking forward to enjoying the weather.
Yeah. Everyone says it's nice outside. I haven't been outside for the whole week, but you know. How are you doing, Vanessa?
Hello, Henry. I am doing all right. It's Friday as well.
So she's promised to be nice to me. So
I didn't promise, I don't think. But
that's what I heard. That's what I heard. And Laura, how are you doing?
Hey, Henry, I'm doing great today. Thanks.
So before we start, why don't you introduce yourselves? And we'll start with Laura. Why don't you introduce yourselves, a little bit about your background, and then we'll go to you, Vanessa, then we'll go to you, Sandy, then we'll go to you, Francesca.
Sure. My name's Laitenen Warren. I'm a member of the Oneida Nation, and this is my first week in 20 plus years that I'm also not an employee of the Oneida Nation. I took some time off to complete my dissertation and be a virtual student at home mom with my kids. So, but my background is I previously worked for the United Nations Chairman, Dehase Hill, was a senior policy advisor, and have worked in the HR field, training and development, education for the United Nation for the vast part of my career.
And Vanessa, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Vanessa Mcdowell. I am CEO of YWCA Madison, which I am representing. Also, I say I'm a CEO by day and a DJ by night. So I'm also known as DJ Ace on the ones and twos. I'm born and raised here in Madison and really have a commitment to see our community do better. And so I've been with the Y for 6 years, but in the capacity of CEO, 3. And so, yeah, that's who I am.
Madisonian.
Yeah,
which is rare to be in that and in your role you're in. And Sandy represents you too. Since she's represents your stuff. Other side, there you go. Don't let her outdo you. Don't let her do that to you.
Gotta showcase that big B there. So I'm the CEO. I'm Sandy Morales, CEO of Big Brothers Big Sisters of Dane County. We are the largest youth mentoring organization in the county, serving over 600 youth that are matched with caring adult mentors. It's obviously been challenging this year with that. But I've been in this role for the last about four years. I've been with Big Brothers Big Sisters since 2013. So I too have served in various capacities with the organization in both like fund development, marketing, before becoming the CEO. I've been in nonprofits for half my career span time. So before that, I was at United Way, also in marketing and fund development roles. I'm not originally from Madison, so I'm originally from this small town outside Chicago, about 45 minutes west of Chicago, called Batavia, Illinois, small town. But both my parents are immigrants, so they came to the States from Mexico over 40 years ago. And, if you know anything about Illinois and the Chicago area, it has a very large Mexican immigrant population. And so a lot of that is what pulled my family to settle in the Chicago area. And so came to Wisconsin when I went to Marquette. And then met my husband there, and he's from Madison. And so here we are.
Oh, so you married that Madison guy.
I did. It was a good move, I would say.
Okay. Yeah. I tend to I like this Madison folks. I'm biased though. I'm biased. Besides Vanessa, we all good. We're good people. Francesca, why don't you introduce yourself?
We'll see if you like me too then. I am Francesca Hong, born and raised here in Madison, Wisconsin. I'm a proud daughter of Korean immigrants. My parents came here in the 80s to pursue an education, and I grew up on the near west side in university housing, came up in the public schools. I went to school originally at the UW-Madison for journalism, and I ended up dropping out to pursue professional cooking full-time. I'm a proud 15-year veteran of the service industry. And in 2016, after the birth of my son, I decided opening a restaurant and expanding the family by 20 would be a good idea. Our restaurant is Morris Ramen on the Capitol Square. After opening the restaurant, I also co-founded the Culinary Ladies Collective in response to the 2016 election as a way to network and empower women in the food and beverage industry and raise funds for like-minded organizations like Planned Parenthood and the Rape Crisis Center that really works to uplift women. In 2020, I co-founded Cook It Forward, which aims to uplift restaurants by working with local grassroots organizations to bring meals directly to those who have been impacted by COVID-19, who need healthy restaurant-prepared meals. And we work with last mile delivery drivers, and it's a program that's ongoing that I'm quite proud of and learning a lot from. And I also, back in May, declared a candidacy and am now the Democratic nominee for the 76th Assembly District. And I want to thank Henry and Madison 365 for holding this summit this week and for inviting all of us.
Thank you, Francesca. See, now she was nice to me. She was nice. I just want to point that out to someone on this panel. She was nice. So, this is what I call my pulse check, right? So, like, how are you feeling right now? So much has gone on this year. How are you feeling? This is what I call a pulse check. Francesca, how are you feeling right now?
I'm fatigued. Mentally, I am, pretty much depleted. Ready to get outside at some point today. And spend some time with my son. But yeah, I'm feeling worn. I'm worn.
Yeah.
But it's empowering to be here with everyone, so things are looking up.
And I think everyone feels that way. Like we've had 25 panels, and I think every panelist has kind of said, they're in that place too. What about you, Sandy?
I live with a good amount of just uneasiness every day. And I mean, I was just in a planning session with my staff talking about the future, and it's so hard to, put a stake in the ground and say, this is where we're going to be, this is what we're going to accomplish, and there's just a lot that's happening. There's a lot that's happening in the next month, just with the upcoming election. And an organization like us actually during the last election, it was good. We had a lot of people that decided to volunteer. And we're just not quite sure what's going to happen as a result of the election, how people will feel empowered, whether they want to volunteer or, because of whether it's good or bad. And just not knowing what the effects of the pandemic, depending on the election and the vaccine, that uncertainty, I think it just exists, and it's just hard to really, give anything a definite answer, whether it's our own personal lives, for our staff, for our volunteers, for our families, our youth. It's really hard to be definitive about a lot of things.
What about you, Vanessa? Where are you at?
Same similar feelings, fatigued, think exhausted, probably, all the above, mentally, physically, emotionally. I bring into this space, obviously, all the things that have happened when we're talking about the pandemic, but I'm bringing in the space, the other pandemic, of the racial tensions that have been going on, and all of the murders and attempted murders and Black people. And when I left for work this morning and my garage door raised, the first thing I saw across the street of my neighbor was a Trump sign. And so that's what I bring in this space right now.
That the Trump sign, that's a good or bad thing? What does that mean?
It's terrible. Okay. Let's yeah.
Just for our viewers who just want to make sure we clarify, that's a bad thing.
It's a terrible thing.
Laura, how are you feeling, Laura?
I'm doing okay. As I mentioned, I'm home now, but I've only been a week out of working in the tribal government. And we had our tribal election for our leadership in July. So we've been going through a transition, but I feel really good about our leadership and their connections that they have with our local governments, and also even beyond being a sovereign nation. So I'm hopeful of the future for Oneida and the country overall, but there are challenges. My husband teaches at the Oneida High School, and as some of us are doing okay. We have, we're able to connect virtually right now, but there are, I hear sad stories every day about kids in his class that he can't get in touch with, or, trying to get them hotspots so they can connect. So, always living in the daily of how this virus and this state of dysfunction for our country, how it's affecting our youth, and and their families, and how their families are hurting, and how that's trickling down to their kids. And so it is a difficult time, but I try to be hopeful for better things to come. But I too see the Trump signs, and I always is not a good thing for me either, in my opinion. So I just say we're not going trick-or-treating at their houses. I guess we're probably not even going trick-or-treating anyway, but so doing okay.
I think we should establish that a Trump sign is just always bad.
Okay. Hey, just want to make sure. I don't want anyone to assume that some people think it's good. It's a good thing. So, Vanessa, I will come back to you, Vanessa. I think you said something that you said you're doing 2 different pandemics, right? And so I want to dig in a little bit deeper for that with all of us. There is COVID-19 that's hit the communities, hit all of our communities more than the broader communities, right? So COVID-19, then this other pandemic, and I'm assuming when you say this other pandemic, you're talking about Breonna Taylor, Mr. Floyd being killed. I'm assuming you're talking about that, right? But I don't want to put words in your mouth. So can you tell us a little bit about how COVID-19 has impacted you, your community, your work, and then how this other pandemic too? What does that come into it? I'll come to you next, Sandy.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we have the health crisis going on with the pandemic, and COVID-19 for sure has impacted specifically the Black community hard. And one thing that I think this pandemic has put light on, that it was already there, but I think it shed more light on the fact that communities of color specifically are hit harder when it comes to these health disparities and even getting help. I remember I did a YW talk early on with Pastor Marcus Allen, and he was talking about the horrible situation that happened with his mom and her having COVID-19 in Milwaukee and not getting the help that she needed to almost, a dire situation here. And so, dealing with that has been challenging. Also, just the fact that, I've lost loved ones during this time in my family, and not being able to feel like you're properly or having that closure and coming together has been tough, as well as just, I would say, with work. Obviously at YWCA Madison, specifically our downtown building, we're essential, right? So we've been working this whole time and trying to make sure that our residents and participants are safe during this time. And thankfully, nobody in our building, we have over 100 people that live in our building, none of them have contracted the virus, which has been a blessing. But it's taken a lot of effort to, sanitize the building and do all the things that we've had to do and change operations. And at one point we had created a quarantine floor just in case something happened. So it's been a lot of work to be able to support people, but also the isolation, as you can imagine, that comes with COVID-19 as well, and the impact that that's having on people's mental health, and not being able to, be around people. Specifically in our building, we have pretty small rooms, and so people are kind of locked up in the rooms and not able to communicate. So we're trying to figure out ways that we can continue to have some type of interaction, even though we can't really be in gatherings. But there's, if we're just going upstairs just to check on people, just to have a conversation that day, little things that we could do just to make sure that people have some contact with someone, we are being very intentional about. As far as the other pandemic, obviously, racial justice, that's the work that we do at YWCA Madison. Our mission is to eliminate racism, empower women, and promote peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. And so we just came off of our racial justice summit, Henry. And one of the things that was awesome about it was that our theme, we pivoted, right? Because, with any planning thing, as you know, Henry, like this whole summit, I'm sure once you're done, you're ready, you're planning for the next one. So we were doing the same thing, had a whole different theme. Then 2020 hit, and we had to figure out, okay, what are we doing here? And so we changed our theme, and our theme became Reconstruction Period, Centering Blackness, a collective, basically call to action to power and justice for all. And so what was powerful about it was that we were able to actually center Blackness, which felt weird, to be honest, because it doesn't happen, right? So the conversation around that, and the conversation around when we're free, everybody's free, the conversation around collective liberation, those kinds of things came out of the conference. And it was beautiful to see kind of how people connected the dots, and not only came away being inspired, but came away with action. What can we do differently? So, yeah.
If I was invited, I would love to been there and hear there. And I mean,
everybody was invited. Hello, did you sign up?
I didn't get an invite. I mean, I'm just saying. I did say racial leaving out justice summit, because that's what I hear. All right, that's fine. That's powerful stuff. Actually, I want to come back to what you're talking about, because I think that leads to a lot of different conversations about how do we, as different groups, work together. And I think that's without feeling like one of us is getting left out, right? So I think it's like we all have pains. Our pains are really close, right? So like how we get there, our pains might come from a different place, but our pains our struggle are similar. But come to you, Sandy. What about you? How has COVID-19 impacted you and yourself, your community, and your work? And if you feel free to talk about the other pandemic too that Vanessa was talking about. If you want.
Yeah, prior to COVID, we were on this trajectory as an organization to continue building our mentoring programs, improving them, expanding them, growing them. As you know, we've always had a wait list of youth that have been that want to be matched with a mentor. And 88% of our youth that we serve are youth of color, right? And we serve, the majority are primarily Latino and Black youth that are on our wait list. And so we were really looking forward to growing our program this year. But with COVID, that has not happened. All our relationships that we make are traditionally in-person relationships. That's how we build relationships with each other is through in-person. And so our matches that are currently together have taken a really hard hit, especially coming up with ways for our mentoring, our bigs and littles to stay connected, and then trying to figure out, can they even stay connected? Do they have the technology capacity to even video chat? Or in many cases, we found that the parent was the only person in the household that had a phone, if at times a phone. And so that made it really hard for our matches to stay connected. Our kids are lonely. I think that's one of the things that we're seeing right now, is that there's a lot of loneliness happening. And that is really hitting me hard. I just can't, it's hard. You try to bring a service to a child or even a young person, and to see that taken away from them is really hard to swallow, or the fact that they're navigating virtual learning on their own a lot of times is what we're seeing. I think that definitely brings me a lot of pain, and just thinking about the fact that we can't. It's hard to do something. It's and trying to figure out, what can we do? What do we do? We have some really amazing volunteers, bigs, that have stepped up, that have really done everything they can in their power to stay connected with their little brother or little sister. They've been coming up with care packages. They've been delivering them. They're making every effort to call them every week, write them letters, put them in the mail. For our kids to get something in the mail, it can really bring a lot of joy and happiness. They're going and picking up their meals from school. So if they're not able to pick up like their lunch, options for the week, they'll do that, or they'll deliver food. So, the upside to this has been that our volunteers have stepped up, and we're really happy to see that. But of course, there are definitely some of our kids that have additional challenges, especially our young kids. The 6 to 9-year-olds, where virtual is just really hard for them to grasp. And so those are the ones that we're really concerned about, our young kids that are really need that mentor, need that, someone else that's looking out for them, and to have that lacking. It's very challenging for us. On the from a racial justice perspective, because a lot of our bigs are white, they're Caucasian, and many have seen, obviously they all know what's happening. A lot of their littles are youth of color, and we've seen a mix of, we have bigs that are like, want to jump in and want to help and want to have these conversations with our kids. And while that's well-intentioned, it's not always appropriate. And so we've had to really work with our volunteers to say, that's not necessarily something that you need to do or you want to do. We found that some of our youth are also very very tired of the conversation. And believe it or not, a 15-year-old can be exhausted too. Of having to live with this conversation, and then to have your volunteer mentor also bring it up is not exactly always welcomed. And so one of the things that we've been working on is, okay, as a volunteer, you need to do your own work. We need to explore how can you be a better ally, not just for your little, but for the entire community. So we've kind of taken that in a little bit of a different direction to our volunteers. The training that we've been providing to them has been more focused on their role as an individual, as an ally, and how that can influence their relationship as a volunteer. So those are kind of like the two big pieces, trying to manage the challenges of not being to see each other in person, and then the work that our volunteers can do on their own to be better allies, not just for their mentee, but for the entire community.
Yeah, I never would have thought about, and it makes so much sense that your bigs, that you call them your bigs, am I saying that, bigs, that they also have to be culturally competent, right? I mean, they have to be culturally competent, know when to engage, when not to engage at youth. So I never even thought about that. That's a big undertaking. And I want to say, I love that you teared up. I loved it, because that tells me you're the right person for that job. That someone cares about those babies like that. You want someone in a job like that who cares about those babies. So that tells me a lot about you in that role. And I've known you for a while. I've never seen you tear up. So
I was surprised too. But yeah.
Thank you. Francesca, same question for you. COVID-19, how's it impacted you, your community, your jobs, I should say, and you can address the other pandemic that Vanessa has so brought up too.
Yeah, so I think I have to begin by kind of defining different communities and being either a representative or a conduit. I always like to make sure that folks know that I think it would be a disservice to the community if I were to say I'm a voice and represent all of the pains and the fears that the communities are going through. So I'll speak first about the service industry community and the small businesses, especially restaurants. COVID-19 you've seen restaurants really do everything to try to adapt while keeping their employees as safe as possible. And it's a delicate balance of deciding every day whether it's going to be their livelihood or their life, and understanding that they're also choosing between their livelihood and their life when it comes to work. And that decision, those types of decision makings are very they're difficult for all leaders, but in the restaurant industry particularly, I think there's a fear of workers not coming back, and also how many restaurants are going to close. And then for the workers, there's a fear of contracting viruses from interactions with the community, as well as am I going to have a job tomorrow? So COVID-19 has really just amplified more fear. And when there's a lot of fear and there's people decision making, when there's a lot of fear, I think it makes folks lose a lot of trust. And so the restaurant industry, to be very frank, is hanging on by a thread. And without policy changes or stimulus, you're going to see probably, I would say, over 50% of small independent restaurants close, and the first restaurants to go are going to be restaurants most likely owned by people of color, restaurants who don't have the resources to get air purifiers and change their exhaust systems and get domes and fire pits or whatever the city will or won't allow. You're going to see the restaurants who don't have the resources to pivot, and who don't always know how to find the resources that might be available from a state or city through like grants or what's available. And then in the AAPI community, I've been getting to learn from folks at the Hmong Institute, and specific resources that they're really needing right now are, again, just trying to help folks navigate the fear of living through multiple pandemics. There's fear right now for folks with citizenship questions or folks who are undocumented. That citizenship test fees went up. There are folks who are in need of food care boxes. So there are direct resources, and then there's indirect resources that really need to go out to that community that's lacking right now as well. There's also a large API community that are UW students. And so that in itself, there are navigating virtual learning and also being in one of the COVID hotspots in the state and trying to learn and, be a student right now is difficult, especially when I see a lot of scapegoating and putting the students to blame for some of the coronavirus cases numbers. So I think the pandemic, unfortunately, has put a lot of communities who have maybe already felt a lot of fear and exacerbated that. And I would say, in terms of the need to address racial justice more urgently now more than ever, I think I actually see some opportunity. And what I mean by that is, in the service industry, we are finally having this conversation about, how our industry really did come from it, and kind of is rooted in white supremacy, that tipping in itself. If we look at the history of tipping and how racist it is and how it has kept wages low for Black people for a very long time. And if you look at tipping now, how different the scales are in terms of who receives higher percentages of tips over other folks. I think the restaurant industry is, and I kind of hate this word, but I think it's the most appropriate, is in a reckoning. And we're having people finally talk about getting rid of tipping, that we have to take care and fight for immigration reform, that restaurant industry and restaurant owners need to be amplifying and addressing their own anti-Blackness in our community. I think for that, I think there's a lot of work that people realize finally is that needs to be done, and they're taking some initiative to do it. We all need to be better. We all need to do better. And I see opportunities in the restaurant industry because that industry is still at the heart, one of care and one about people. And I think centering care and people right now is really important when you're facing crises and multiple crises at that.
Thank you. I never hear about the tip thing. That's actually deep. I don't know I didn't know the history of the tipping thing. So you might have to educate me at some point later about what the history of that is. It makes sense when you said it, but I bet most people don't think about that as how white supremacy can play a role in that tipping. Laura, I'll come to you and ask you the same question, my friend. COVID-19, how's it impacted you, your community, your role, your job? And address the other pandemic too, if you like.
Absolutely. I think in terms of with the Oneida Nation, I'm really proud of our leadership in that we were very proactive in addressing the pandemic. I know as early as January, February, we had been talking about how are we going to move forward? What if this gets bigger? We have these large, they're called General Tribal Council meetings, where we have up to 1,200 people gathering to come to, it's basically like our government meeting. And we canceled those as early as March. So the United Nation has been very progressive and proactive in dealing with it. And yet we still now, at current time, have a lot of active cases. Unfortunately, it seemed like we were able to keep it at bay for a while. But I think as with the overall state of Wisconsin, and as with you guys there in Madison, up in Green Bay, we're in a hot spot as well. So the tribe is not exempt from that, and we also continue to have issues with healthcare. Although we have the Bureau of Indian Affairs, we have a health center here that does amazing work for our community. But I think continuing to need more funding, more testing, more resources. And so in terms of the pandemic, Oneida is doing okay. I think all the communities of color are really struggling, as we know. One of the hardest hits, however, I think from my perspective, was that of the employment. The Oneida Nation has been a top employer in the area, in the Green Bay area, for some time. And we went from, gosh, I don't even know the percentage of layoff, but we went from almost 2,000 employees down to 600 some at one point. And so they're slowly starting to bring people back, but we know that it's going to be a completely different Oneida Nation as an employer than it was before. So that in itself is challenging. And of course, because so many of our members of the Oneida Nation are also our employees, that has reached them as well. But there's been a lot of effort for mobile food pantry, getting meals out. There's been a lot of activism, grassroots from the community in terms of addressing the pandemic, and then also the other crisis we're talking about in terms of racial justice. We've had I think it was about 2 years ago, we had an Oneida young man, Jonathan Tubby, that was killed while in police custody in Green Bay. And that has been, I was always surprised it wasn't a bigger story when you hear the details of that case. But that's something that our nation has, the political leaders and just people overall have tried to step up and be a part, and you'll see them trying to join more with Black Lives Matter and trying to bring attention and get justice.
Well, you just said Black Lives Matter. So I want to jump into that, right? Because at all of our panels, at least today, all of them brought up Black Lives Matters in one fashion or all of them. And I could see how some, and it kind of goes over what Vanessa was saying earlier, how the Black experience was center to their YWCA Racial Justice Summit, that's unique. And so we all come from different communities. What, when you hear Black Lives Matters, what do you, are 2 or 3 things that you feel like you can connect to that makes it relevant for you too, or what's going on in your community? I'll start with you, Sandy, because I think I started with Vanessa before. I'll start with you, Sandy.
Yeah, the one thing that kind of always stays top of mind when I hear, or when we talk about Black Lives Matter and how that's soaked into what I do or my work, or just my thought process is, obviously, the kids that we serve, we represent both, Latino, Black youth, and, folks, also youth that are biracial, right? That don't necessarily, from a racial perspective, identify with more than one, but, how youth identify obviously is different. But, and taking that plus into account my own background, with my parents being an immigrant, me being born here, yet still relating to so many of the DACA students as well that are, as we call it, documented. And so when I look at history and when I think about what Black Lives Matters means to me and to my constituents, I think about the fact that, for example, if Black lives truly mattered, then I think about all the other underrepresented groups, how we could all rise together, right? If Black lives mattered, how easier it would be to reform our immigration system, how people who are perceived as not, white American would be treated differently. So I see it as a seed. Truly, if this seed were allowed to grow and really flourish, how all immigrants could flourish, and our tribal communities could flourish. And that's something that I've actually seen, message in the Latino community, like where our Latino community is battling our own colorism and racism as well. And the big message that a lot of us are trying to send even to our own Latino community is like, you realize that if Black lives mattered, our lives would matter too. And so that to me, that's kind of where like my centeredness is around this whole issue, is like I see the bigger picture here and what that could mean to a lot of the other underrepresented communities, here nationally, around the world, really. This is not just a US issue. This is a global issue. So that's what it means to me.
Yeah, and that's interesting. That's an interesting perspective. So, Francesca, for you, it's the same question, right? Like Black Lives Matters, and that's like the topic of the day, and that's what people are talking about. And are there 2 or 3 things that you can kind of connect with and from your community perspective? And I'm asking also because, look, because of the coronavirus and the President Trump really taking shots at the Asian community, calling it whatever virus is called, the China virus or whatever it's calling. Asian community has their own issues right now that's going on, right? I mean, like President Trump has definitely highlighted some issues that are going on and really is targeting the Asian community in their own sense. So are there 2 or 3 things that you can see that you can kind of connect with that Black Lives Matters, that you see there's some unified message in there?
I think a unified message needs to be preceded by, and I kind of echo and agree with a lot of what Sandy was talking about, that, when Black lives matter, the rest of us will matter. I think it's important to center that the Black experience is actually separate from the immigrant experience. And there are connections, but I think I'm always pretty careful about talking about it being similar pains, and seeing it first as separate pains. And then again, recognizing that within the AAPI community, there are colorism issues, that there are folks who are really, who need to address our internalized racism and know that these issues exist in our communities, but that it's very important to take lead and be supportive of and recognize that the needs and the fears and the injustices that the Black community continues to experience is experiencing is separate. That's kind of my view. I think where we can find connections is really to reach out and to better understand history. There's especially for, I'm Korean American, and if you look back at what happened with Rodney King and the LA riots, I think it's very important that every Korean American, or really mostly East Asians, recognize that whiteness and white supremacy is global, is pervasive, and it oftentimes leads us to think that we're separate from the issues that impact the Black community. And so I think when I hear Black Lives Matter, I immediately just have to continue to remind myself and those in my community, both in the Korean community and the broader AAPI community, that, when Black Lives Matter, then all lives will matter. And I think, we all have to be better. We all have a lot of work to do. And we definitely deserve to have spaces where we can talk about the discrimination and the xenophobia happening to the AAPI community? Absolutely. Do I think centering those issues, it's really important to recognize that having those spaces and conversations, we have to recognize that we can value those experiences and those injustices, but I don't think it's fair to put them in the same paradigm as what's happened to Black people in this country.
You see, I'm quiet because I've never heard anyone say that to me before, and that's interesting that you have enough experience to differentiate the immigrant perspective versus the Black perspective and experience. I wish we had so much more time to dig into that, because I think that is so deep, and it's a conversation that more people need to have. Because you also have to be secure enough in what you're saying, right? So you have to be secure enough to know that you still have your own struggles.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't want to devalue anyone's experience. I mean, I remember very clearly the first time that someone called me a chink, right? And I think that having that, talking about that, I have to be mindful of the space. But again, it's important to recognize that, we can talk about centering Black lives, but I don't really know how much everyone talks about what that means. And until we really figure that out, I don't think we're in a place really to constantly talk about other experiences and those connections. And I think it's really important to kind of define, what that means and where we need to be as a collective understanding of that, and then we can grow from there. I really like Sandy's metaphor of having that be a seed and really growing from that.
All right, this is good stuff. So Laura, I'm coming to you to ask you the same question, right? So Black Lives Matter. Are there 2 or 3 things that you think that you can connect to, that you see that's unifying issues there?
Well, I think for me, clearly, I look white. I can pass as white, although I'm half Native. My mom's full-blood Oneida, and she fell in love with this Finnish guy. So here I am. But I think that growing up, I grew up on the reservation, and while I understand what Francesca is saying about the different experiences, and I think that for me, I'm thankful that you asked me to be a part of this, but I'm always a little hesitant to be in spaces with Black, Indigenous people of color because of my white privilege. However, I'm thankful to be a part, and I think, and I have an important role in the good fight, in that I always say I can be a good infiltrator, and I can always kind of go in and people, unfortunately, more times than I'd like to share. I've had, unfortunately, people that assume that I'm white, and they assume that because I look white that I share their racist views. And I experienced that a lot with the start of Indian gaming and working at the casinos. So in terms of kind of off topic a little bit, but just kind of talking about how the experiences are different, I have absolutely no idea, but about, being a person that actually appears of color. However, with that being said, I think that the Native community, understanding history, knowing the things that have been done, that there is, I think, like I mentioned earlier with the Jonathan Tubby case, I think there's a lot of power in unity. There's a lot of power in reaching across, and finding that there's not a finite amount of justice. It should be there for everybody. We can work towards that. Green Bay recently passed an equal rights ordinance just this last week. And when they allowed community comments, there was an older white gentleman that came on, and he said, he said a lot, but one of the things that stuck out to me was that, well, if everybody's getting these rights, then who isn't getting them? If we're giving these rights to other people, then somebody's not having rights, right? And it was just this really kind of like, wow, if that's really your belief, then no wonder you hoard, you would hoard all the power, all the justice, everything for yourself if you think there's a finite amount. So I think having these conversations like we are now, I think that's important. And for the Native community, I think I try to challenge any anti-Blackness in the Native community that I see. And I think that comes, that internalized oppression. I've heard people call it the oppression Olympics. Natives sometimes will do that. And I think we have to remember we're all in it. We all need to rise together. So those are just some things that I think that that I can connect with in terms of Black Lives Matter and trying to get justice for everybody. And as Francesca said, when Black Lives Matter everybody's lives matter. It's, things are so often seen in literally black and white. So I think that that's the connection that I have.
Thank you. And interesting, like this is an educated panel, right? So she actually acknowledged, she says she has white privilege. That's interesting to hear her say that. Vanessa,
Can I just say something really quickly?
Of course, yes.
So I just want to I want to acknowledge that me, like, I'm still like I'm I'm a Latina, but like there's still a lot that I need to learn around centering Black people, like in terms of, especially in my line, in my line of work, or, just being someone that has this position at this organization. I can be honest and say, like, could I have been this expressive? Could I have said this message in January? And I would have said no, like, not because I didn't want to, just because I felt like in the last few months, I've just taken the time for myself to learn about, like, what Black Lives Matters means, why it's important, how does it just, I mean, it's definitely changed my perspective on a lot of things. I think about back to even some of my actions in the past, or how I've thought. And, I've just kind of been like, I do feel like my thought process and how I think about Black Lives Matters is it's a lot different than I would say even like January or February, so for me, I've done some work, and I know there's still more work to be done, but I think there's a lot of us that are like that. You could be a person of color, and yet you still don't get it. And I'm still working on it. And I'll be honest to say, like, again, I'm still working on it, even as a person of color. But there's still definitely even work to be done in our own communities. So
even the Black community, not everyone just because you're Black, I mean, you get it. That's a whole different conversation. Vanessa, I want to ask you a little bit of the same question, but I want to tweak it a little bit, right? I want to tweak it a little bit for you, because yes, Black Lives Matters. Yep. Center Blackness. Yep. But what can we do? And I'm asking from a Black perspective, and somewhat what you're saying earlier. We still have allies who have their own struggles. Like I was mentioning, like Trump is saying about the China virus, what Trump was doing, and I don't want to make this about President Trump, so I don't want to make this a political thing. But there's still what our allies are going through, like immigration from the Latino community. If you look at the Native American community, sexual assault on them, I mean, like there's so much stuff that's going on in other communities and other allies, people of color. How do we become allies for everyone else, knowing that Black Lives Matters? Does that make sense to you? Like that question, like how do we unify, knowing that Black Lives Matters, but there's also all these other issues going on in other parties, other people are having pain too. How do we make sure that we still keep their pains issue too moving forward and advocate for them also?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's not that we don't, and I'm only speaking for myself, I also want to be clear that although we represent these different communities, we are not monolithic in any form or fashion, and that this is my perspective as Vanessa.
Hopefully that's given. Hopefully that's a given to our audience.
Sometimes it's not. So I just want to make sure. So, for me, sometimes the feeling for me is like, I'm out there marching with, the fight about immigrant rights, right? I'm out there fighting and marching, when we're talking about this fool calling it, the China virus, like, I feel like as Black people, it feels like sometimes that we are out there supporting others, but don't get the same support in return. And so I only say that to say that, I appreciate Sandy just acknowledging, I have a lot to learn. I'm still learning. I'm still on the path, as well as Laura saying, look, I recognize my privilege, right? And then I just appreciate Francesca for actually first causing you to be silent for a minute. And two, I just appreciate the fact that she brought it home, because when you think about this struggle and you think about, and this is basically the content or the subject matter of our summit, was basically to say Black people have been at the bottom forever. When it comes to the inception of slavery, to all of these things, right? Cattle slavery, because I've heard people, chime in and say, well, the Irish were slaves. I'm like, yeah, that was a different kind of situation. That it's kind of like when you raise something from the bottom, everything above it also goes up, right? And so just having the concept that, as we just talked about, in every sort of POC community, there is this conversation that needs to happen around colorism. It happens all the time, right? We have the light skin, we have the darker skin, and the treatment and mistreatment that happens in those spaces. We need to talk about how that is linked to anti-Blackness, right? That the lighter you are, the closer in proximity you are to whiteness. The darker that you are, the closer in proximity you are to Blackness, which has been equated with dirty and all these things, right? So I personally want to acknowledge and honor what Francesca said, that it's really about starting at a place of centering Blackness. Yes, we have all these fights, and as was mentioned, the oppression Olympics, all these things. But if you get to a place of understanding and doing the self-work about uprooting that white supremacist mindset in your own mind, and as you mentioned, Henry, you can be Black and still have it, right? Because we were all taught under this white supremacist educational system. We were all taught, there are just a whole bunch of things that have been ingrained in us to think. And we think about Black people, and I'm reading Dr. DeGroy's book about post-traumatic slave syndrome. There's a lot of things that have been ingrained in us, even still, that come out that are still from slavery, right? That we for some reason, as Black people, feel like we have to bow down still to master, So I say that to say that there's, of course, a lot of battles, a lot of issues going on. But if there was a place to start, it would be to start with centering Blackness.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think you're right about colorism, right? I mean, I think even in the Latin community, there's racism there. I know that for a fact, right? Like the lighter you are and all that stuff. But I'm coming to you, Francesca. It's the same question, but what do we need from our allies? Like, what do we need from our allies to be true allies, right? Like, so Vanessa just kind of said we need to be center Blackness, and that kind of starts from there. But how do you think, what do we need from our allies from your perspective?
Humility, an understanding that there are a couple we have to do. I think you have to be willing to be uncomfortable. You have to unlearn, and then actually there's just two, and then you have to do some learning. And then I think that's actually the first foundation, and then you start doing the work. And I think, and I shouldn't have put that in quotes, but a lot of people talk about doing the work. And I think it starts with, being humble and a willingness to be uncomfortable and unlearn some of the biases that are in you, and knowing that they're there, and then learning about other experiences and how not to center yourself in it. And then, and I think that's the first step we as other members of the community can start to really center Blackness. And then I think, and when I'm talking about learning, I think there's so much in history that we have to look at. And that's how I learn more about how tipping is an incredibly racist system. And, we have to look at how, policies like really have shaped our communities are inherently racist and have been designed to keep Black communities underprivileged and marginalized, and have built these attitudes that have then shifted out to impact other communities of color. So I think it's about humility, it's about being uncomfortable, and then it's about unlearning before we can actually begin to learn and do the work. And so much of what we can begin to understand that actually does unite us more than divides us is in our history, and going into learning that history with a mindset that so much of it is so deeply rooted in just systems that we have a lot of work to do, but it starts with a willingness to be uncomfortable.
Thank you for that. I'm coming to you, Laura. Same question. Like, what can our allies do? I mean, to really prove that they're allies, right? Again, Vanessa has clearly stated that she thinks it'd be centered around Blackness. But what about you? What do you think that the steps are for allies for us?
I think one of the things, just thinking of, again, this is just from my perspective as who I am. I think one of the things is to, I wrote cultural humility down as well. And for us, for, working with people that we're not familiar with, recognizing that we have our own biases in ourselves, and there's cultural incompetence in our communities and the broader community. So I think that cultural humility to continue learning, and I think that's the main thing, that openness of learning, continuing to talk. Yes, being uncomfortable, being willing to listen and learn, being willing to maybe be embarrassed by something you thought you knew and you have somebody correct you. I think one of the things I think of often, which seems simple to me, is, the Native American mascot issue, right? Of course, everybody knows the one Native guy that says he likes the Redskins, or, he's okay with it, and people latch on to that guy. Rather than looking at the statements upon statements that have been issued by tribal leaders, talking about the damage that they do to the, to self-esteem of youth, and the caricatures. And so I think that when Native people are telling you they're offensive, or, they're derogatory, it should be like, okay, all right. And not to hang, the opinion of one particular guy that supports your view as it, so I think that's a piece of it, being able to be humble, being able to listen, and then listen to what people are telling you, and to make space for those that don't have the privileges that you do.
Yeah, I'm learning that listening is a skill, right? Not everyone's really good at just sitting back and listening, and so that's a skill. Actually, even Mai today, who works at Green Bay, and she was telling about her students, and she said one of her students, the challenge that her students said they're watching the summit and they enjoyed it, but they said one of the hardest things they had to do was listen. And they said it was really hard for them just to listen. And I thought that was a really powerful statement, that we need more people who can just listen and learn sometimes. So, but Sandy, I'm gonna ask you the same question, Sandy, about what from our allies. What do we need from our allies that legitimize them as being allies? What do you think that is?
Well, just to add on to what everyone was saying, really, I think the two things that I can think of is, you need to invest in the Black community, right? I mean, whether that is where the community will benefit from various services. I know there's plenty of Black-led nonprofits that cater particularly to the Black community. So, I do believe that's important, that they are delivering services that benefit the Black community. So that's one thing. And not just, I'm not just talking about nonprofits, but there's businesses. There's different ways to ensure that Black entrepreneurs are thriving as well. And so that's one of the things that I would say, investing in the Black community. And then the other thing, kind of to add on to the, the listening and the learning. And, the one thing that I've also been working on, and I've talked a little bit about, I heard in a different conversation, I don't remember who said it, was asking yourself, are there weeds in your garden? When you think about like those around you, like who's in your circle, and having those conversations, and are your friends or your family, which is hard, what are they saying about this? And you have the opportunity to educate them. And I'm not saying it's going to be successful, but versus staying silent, I would rather say that's not what I'm about. And I'd rather learn if this is truly what you believe. Like, I think it would put that question in my mind. Like, is this a relationship that I really want to continue pursuing, or am I going to be like, I'm going to spend my time somewhere else? And right now with the age of COVID, and it's so hard to stay in touch with people and to see people, my time is very valuable. And my relationships are, I want to care for those relationships, but I want to care for those relationships where we are both working together to change the narrative. So I would definitely, it's not just about learning, but then like, how are you going to turn around and make sure that others are coming with you as well?
I gotta echo what Sandy says and just like go to Black-owned restaurants, put your money where your mouth is, pay Black people, and listen to Black women. As like in addition to what I said before.
And I appreciate you guys. When I was talking about allies, I wasn't just talking for Black folks. I was talking about allies. Vanessa. See, this is what they teach in law school, right? Make sure you define the whole conversation. So now we're talking about just Blackness. But what I meant was allies, like for the Latino community, the Asian community, the Native American community. Like, what do we need from allies? But we're running out of time. I didn't just mean from the Black folks, but I appreciate the love. I do. I appreciate the love. We had a question from the audience. I'll make sure I get it. It was something about the pandemic. We got about 8 minutes here. Biggest takeaway from the pandemics going on right now. Anyone can jump in for that question. So the biggest takeaway from the pandemics going on right now. Any of you can jump on that question.
Oh, well, I can just quickly say, biggest takeaway from the pandemic right now is that it's going to be here a while, and that, I was in a planning session with my staff right now, and basically, like the fact that we have to move forward, and we have to be innovative. We have a mission. We still have to deliver on it. And we've been on hold for a little bit because we weren't quite sure where the pandemic was going to take us, but there's been a lot of lessons learned this year, and we have to innovate, we have to move forward, but we still have to deliver on our mission. So, Corona is not going to stop us.
Anyone else want to answer that question?
I was just going to say, what I found to be a huge takeaway from the pandemic and COVID-19 is that the whole world had to stop. And sometimes we get so focused on all the things that we're doing, and we're moving so fast and all these things, and we need to complete this, and we need to do this, and we need to do that. And it's actually not healthy for us personally. It's not healthy for our environment. It's not healthy for anything. So to see how when we stopped, things started to grow and happen, to see the pollution change, to see the animals we've never seen come out, to see, stuff that was happening because the world had to pause, made me really think about my own life and the need to pause and sometimes to reevaluate what I'm doing and what's important and what's not. So that's been one of my takeaways.
Yeah. Like having a brother, a friend, that's really important, right? To have good friends.
You know what? There's been a whole lot of shade during this conversation, but I'm going to leave. We're going to talk after this.
I can't help myself. We have another question here. Yes, Sandy, paraphrasing Ajamo from day one, who you give your money to is who you give your power. I find myself listening to people who have strong racist views, who have no interest in having any empathy for those who look different than them. How do we make a culture change with so much resistance? That's a good question. Who wants to take that one? Francesca, Laura, Vanessa, Sandy. Oh, I can't believe all y'all getting quiet on me. Wow.
No, I mean that's a lot in one question, and I appreciate that. I think it's another something else to come out of the pandemic is just how folks are really analyzing it and paying attention to nuances sometimes, not all the time. I think we're also entering our own echo chambers quite a bit. But how do you meet resistance? I think you increase your own resilience. I think you have to persevere through resistance. I think that changing people's minds, I have to still believe starts and ends with conversation. And people, you know, I think sometimes what's going on is people are so entrenched in their own thinking that they can only have one singular identity. And a lot of people right now are only holding on to a political identity. And when you only have that one identity, it becomes personal. It invades you. It defines you. But human beings are capable of having multiple identities. And I firmly believe that. So I think when you have someone who refuses to kind of, think outside of that one political identity, I think it's important to continue to speak about experiences. I think it's important to continue the conversation at an emotional and a personal level. And I think that and I have to believe that we're all capable of continuing to preserve that humanity.
Okay, we have 4 minutes here left, and I'm going to ask you, we have 25 panels. I'm smiling because it's been a long week. And so, even though it's not over, so we have our award show coming up. It's on Facebook Live. Go to Facebook Live and look at our award show coming up. But one takeaway, I want to say one thing that you are looking forward to from the Native American perspective. One thing, Vanessa, that you're looking forward to for next year from the Black perspective. I know you, again, recognizing you're not speaking for all Native American, you're not speaking for all Black folks. We get all that. So we don't got to go over that. I'm with you. Same thing for you, Sandy. Like, what's the one thing you're looking for next year? I want to be positive. I want to sound positive. Like, what are you looking towards from the Latino community, especially from a Latina? And Francesca, same thing with you from the Asian community, even though you might be in office then. So God bless you. Who wants to start? Let's start with Laura. Laura looks like she's ready. We'll start with you, Laura.
All right. I'd like to see next year, I was excited to see more Native people represented at this panel. I know that that's been a goal of yours to reach out, Henry. So I was really glad to see that. I think that that's a good thing. And just part of who I am is I want to see people working together. And I like to talk about how can we be allies to each other across groups so we can all move forward together. So I think that's huge. Thank you. Thank you for doing this.
I love it. I love people. So anytime we can highlight people, that's my job, and to get out the way and let people be authentic. Francesca, you're unmuted. So I picked on you because you're unmuted. That's all.
I'm looking forward to more visibility for the API community. I am looking for more visibility and representation in all different sectors and industries, from politics to the restaurant industry to, and really more API individuals in leadership positions in their communities.
And we'll continue to try to make that happen. I'll give you my word on that. Sandy?
It's a really hard question, by the way. For what do I look forward to next year for the Latino? I mean, it can range for so many things. There's so many things that I wish for that I hope would happen. I I mean, kind of what Francesca said, certainly the visibility, there's obviously an underrepresentation in all levels of the Latino community, both from, having office all the way to roles at for-profits, nonprofits. I just want to see growth. I think, whatever that means to for our Latino community, a growth in health and prosperity and income. I mean, I want to see our Latino community thrive, but I really want to see our entire community thrive from all of this. And I hope for that resiliency, for it to pan out after, next year, whatever that means in terms of whether it's jobs, our economy going back to a place where our some of our Latino community members, a lot of them that work in the hospitality and the service industry. So yeah, I want to see our communities thrive.
Ms. McDowell.
Yes. What I'm looking forward to and where I find a lot of inspiration is the young Black activists. These youth have been amazing out here protesting over the summer, and I have watched them just continue to grow as leaders in our community. And so I am very inspired by them and look forward to the continued working with them and supporting the work that they're doing, as well as looking forward to hopefully more investment in the Black community.
All powerful stuff, and I thank all of you for your time. Thank you for being our last panel for our third annual summit. Thank you so much, and hopefully, for us, we can hope highlighting each of you and highlight all your organization, all the wonderful work you're doing. You're doing the work. All we can do is highlight, advocate, and do what we can on our end. So thank you, Francesca. Thank you for everything we're doing. Good luck on your campaign. What is it, November? Is that when November?
November 3rd. Everyone remember to vote. Make a plan to vote.
Actually, great point. Yes, vote. I'm not saying, again, we're nonprofit. I'm not saying who to vote for. I'm saying vote. Sandy, thank you for everything you're doing. Thank you for your heart. Thank you for everything you're doing for our community. And I love your heart for unity. I can hear it. But let me go. Laura, Laura, I love you, Laura. Thank you for advocating, because Laura advocates for Black folks. Like Laura is someone who really advocates for unity, and she's been doing that from day one. And she's always someone who's kept me in touch with what's going on with Oneida, but other nations too. So thank you, Laura, for all that. Please keep feeding me so I can continue to learn, please. And Vanessa, sis, as always, I love you, but no, I'm serious. I love you, Vess. Thank you for everything you're doing. I appreciate all the hard work. I appreciate all the work that you're doing. I know you're about to say something, but be nice. Be nice. Thank you. Seriously, thank you all for doing this. And we'll see you next time at our next 4th annual Wisconsin Leadership Summit, wherever it is. Hopefully it's live. And go to our Facebook Live to check out our award show, and that should be fun and entertaining. And thank you.
This is 365 Media.